Hello and welcome to 160-101 Calculus. This week is week 0, or the week before our semester officially starts, and it's time to get started preparing for what's going to happen for the rest of the semester. So we've got 2 videos for this week to look at a couple of things that we'll need during the semester. In part 1, or our first video for the week, we're going to look at how to enter things into a computer, how to enter mathematical expressions into a computer, and how we do this for the quizzes that we're going to have in this course. And in the second video, or part 2, we're going to look at common mathematical symbols and how to use them correctly. Okay, so let's start with part 1. In this course, we have 10 weekly online quizzes. There's essentially a quiz for each week of the semester, except for weeks 6 and 10, where we're instead going to have a test. Each of these quizzes is worth 2.5% for a total of 25% of your total course assessment. So it's quite important that you keep up with these quizzes, not only for practice, that is the main reason, is to get practice with the material we're learning, but it's also important because it is worth a significant part of your final assessment mark. You can take each quiz as many times as you wish up until the quiz due date. The quizzes are generally due on the Thursday following the week material was covered. So in week 1 or next week, you will be doing a quiz on this week 0 material. And in week 2, on the by Thursday, you will have done your quiz on week 1, which covers the week 1 material. For most of these questions in your quizzes, you'll need to enter algebraic expressions for your solutions. So to do so, you need to know what the commands are to enter those into the computers. You'll need to know all your arithmetic operations, your functions, how to use appropriate bracket placement, and all of this is what we're going to discuss in this video. So first, your arithmetic operations. We all know about the operations of adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and raising something to a power from our school days. Here, what we want to make sure we all understand is how to enter that into the computer to provide your quiz answers so that the computer understands exactly what it is you're saying. So the computer uses the plus and minus for add and subtract, very similar to how we might handwrite these. It uses an asterisk to indicate multiplication. It uses the slash to indicate divide, and this little hat here for raised to a power. So if I wanted to enter into the computer for a quiz answer, let's say, x squared plus 2x minus 3x, what I would need to do is think about this in each of its bits. Initially, we've got x squared, so I would enter that into the computer as x hat 2. Then I want to add, so I'm going to do my plus. Next, we want to say 2 times x. Remember, when we write 2x, we mean 2 times x, but the computer doesn't know that. We have to actually tell the computer that we want to multiply 2 times x by entering an asterisk to say multiplication. And finally, we want to subtract using our minus the fraction 3 over x, or 3 divided by x. So 3 and our slash x. Okay. We also will very commonly be using our trig functions in this course. There are 6 of them. You'll know about your sine, your cosine, and your tangent. We also have the cosecant of x, which is 1 over the sine, the secant of x, which is 1 over the cosine, and the cotangent of x, which is 1 over the tangent of x. The trig functions, though, these are all functions, and so the important thing is a function needs an input. In this case, the input into the sine function is x, and the input into the cosine function is x. The computer needs to know exactly what the input is for each function, and we tell the computer what the input is by using brackets. So for computer entry, if we want to type in the sine of x, we must have these brackets. This tells me that I'm taking the sine of x. So x is the input into my sine function. Cosine of x. X is the input into my cosine function. So these brackets are quite important for your computer entry. If you don't have those brackets in your quizzes, you will find that you'll get an error. So if I wanted to enter into my computer 2x cosine of x squared, we need to think about what this is saying. This is 2 being multiplied by x, which is being multiplied by the cosine with the input x squared going into the cosine. So I've got 2. We're multiplying that by x, so the computer needs this asterisk to tell us we're multiplying. We're multiplying by x. Again, we're multiplying, so I need that asterisk if I'm typing into a computer. Now we're taking the cosine of some input, and that input is going to be x squared. So I need the input to be in brackets, and x squared is x hat 2. All right, how would we enter 3x squared times the sine squared of 2x? This one gets a little bit more complicated because of this sine squared here. So we have to think about what that means. Sine squared of 2x means the sine of 2x all squared. This is just a simplified notation that we use when handwriting. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But if I wanted to enter that as an online quiz answer, what I would do is I would say I have 3. I want to multiply that by x squared, so I need my asterisk to say multiply. X squared is written x hat 2. Again, I want to multiply that by the sine squared of 2x, so I need my asterisk. Now, sine squared of 2x, I cannot write as sine hat 2x. If you do this, you'll see that the computer doesn't understand what you're saying. So sine hat 2x, that will definitely give you an error because your computer is reading the sine first, and then it cannot see right next to the sine what the input is into the sine. It wants to see something inside of brackets, but it doesn't see it, so it gives an error. So instead, I need to say that what we're doing is we're taking the sine of 2x, and then I am squaring that. So the sine next to it is 2x, which is the input into the sine, and then I take all of that and I square it. So I've got brackets around all of that, and I'm raising it to the power of 2. So we often handwrite sine of 2x all squared as sine squared of 2x. And the reason that we do that is because we avoid a set of brackets. And this is just easier to read on paper than this is, or on your computer screen than this is, by avoiding that set of brackets. It's just not, this is technically the correct mathematical expression for what we're doing. We're taking the sine of 2x, and then we are squaring all of that. You could write the sine of 2x squared on paper as well, but we normally don't do this because it becomes confusing about what we are squaring. Are we squaring 2x, or are we squaring the sine of 2x? Sine of 2x being squared, or are we saying the sine of 2x all being squared? This notation is very confusing. So again, when we handwrite, we tend to write sine squared of 2x because it's easy to read. But in the computer, you must tell it what you're actually doing, which is you're taking the sine of 2x and then you are squaring. Okay. As well as trig functions, you will have learned about inverse trig functions in school. So inverse trig functions can be written in a couple of different ways. Sometimes we write them as sine minus 1 of x, cosine minus 1x, tan minus 1 of x. We would read this as inverse sine of x, inverse cosine of x, and inverse tangent of x. So that refers to the inverse sine of x. It should not be confused with 1 over x. So before we just said when we had sine squared of x, that was the sine of x all squared. But this should not be confused with the sine of x raised to the power minus 1. We use a different notation for that. So if you had 1 over sine of x, we would call that the cosecant of x. We would not call that sine minus 1 of x. Having said that, to avoid this confusion of using minus 1, it's often also written as the arc sine of x, the arc cosine of x, and the arc tan of x. These all also mean the inverse sine, the inverse cosine, and the inverse tangent. So on paper or in a textbook, you might see either one of these two used, but when you're typing it into your computer for your quizzes, what your computer understands is a sine is the arc sine. What is it of? Well, we're inputting, in this case, x into the arc sine. A cos is the arc cosine. We're inputting x into that a arc cosine, and similarly, a tan is the arc tangent. So we use a for arc in front of our sine, cosine, and tangent, and we again put our input inside of brackets, input into the function inside of brackets. Okay, so let's suppose I wanted to enter x cubed times the inverse sine of x cubed minus 1. Well, we've got x cubed first, so that's x hat 3. We're multiplying that by the inverse sine, so we need our asterisks. The inverse sine we write as a sine. We have our brackets for what we want to input into that function. And then inside of those brackets, our input was x cubed minus 1. So x cubed is x hat 3 minus 1. We also have several other functions that you'll know from school, including the natural log of x, the exponential function e to the x, and the square root of x. So we'll talk a little bit more about these as the course goes on. But for this video, we're going to just focus on how can I type that into a computer. And so the natural log of x can be entered into the computer in two ways. It's a function, so we write ln, meaning natural log, and then what's the input into that function? Whatever it is, we put that inside of brackets. In this case, our input is x. You can also use log to mean the natural log. So log brackets, whatever your input is, in this case x, will also work. E to the x is written e hat x. This is an exponential function, so sometimes in some computer systems you may see this done in a different way, but for this quizzes that we'll be using, e hat x will always work. You'll need here to put whatever the input is into whatever your power is here, in here, and that will need to be in brackets if it's larger than just x. And finally, the square root of x, we can write the square root of x as sqrt, so your computer has a function, sqrt, meaning the square root. The input into that function is, in this case, x, because we're taking the square root of x. So if I wanted to enter e to the 3x times the natural log of the square root of x squared plus 1, I would first look at my e to the 3x. So that's e raised to all of 3x. So 3x needs to be in brackets because everything here, 3x, is all part of my power. So e hat 3x. Then I am multiplying that by my natural log. So I need the asterisks. The natural log will have an input. So we need open and closed brackets there where the input goes inside. The square root here is also a function, that's square root. So it will have brackets where we put the input inside. And finally, what's inside the square root? That was x squared plus 1. So x hat 2 plus 1. So we can input that into the computer as e hat 3x asterisk ln, open brackets, square root, open brackets, x hat 2 plus 1, and then 2 close brackets. Correct bracket use is critical to your proper quiz entry. If you don't have correct bracket use, your computer will read what you are intending in a way that is different than what you might be intending. So we already saw that we needed correct bracket use for our functions, right? Because our functions need an input, and so we need whatever the input is to be inside of brackets. But it's also true that as well as using it to input a function, it's needed for our order of operations. So we'll look at both of these issues. So first of all, if we're looking at it to identify the input of our function, we've got a few functions here, the sine, the natural log, and the square root. And in each case, the input into my function is x squared plus 1. So this is the sine of x squared plus 1, the natural log of x squared plus 1, and the square root of x squared plus 1. But x squared plus 1 is the input into the given function that is shown there. So without those brackets, the computer will not understand any of these functions. Those brackets are critical. They're also critical to identify our correct order of operations. So let's look at a few examples. If I have this thing here that I type into my computer, I can read that as 3 times x squared plus 1 divided by x raised to the power 3 plus 2 times x. So the computer's reading that as 3x squared plus 1 over x cubed plus 2x. Relatively straightforward. But what if I start adding some brackets into that expression? So this is the same expression that I had before, only now I've put some brackets in some key places. And the brackets around this expression here says that everything inside here is divided by everything that's inside these brackets. So I've got 3 times x squared plus 1, or 3x squared plus 1, is being divided by x cubed plus 2x. And that, of course, looks very different to what I had before. So those brackets made a huge difference to how the computer is reading those two expressions. And now I'm going to add one more set of brackets. So this and this are the same, except for this pair of brackets. So what does that new pair of brackets do? Well, this tells me I have 3 times everything that's inside x squared plus 1, and all of that is being divided by what's in the denominator here. So 3 being multiplied by all of x squared plus 1, which is different to 3x squared plus 1, right? 3x squared plus 1 and 3 times all of x squared plus 1 are not the same. And then we're dividing that by x cubed plus 2x. So each set of brackets is giving a very different meaning or very different mathematical expression. And it's very important that we get those brackets right when we're entering them into our quizzes. Okay, so we've now seen that a different bracket placement results in very different output, and that brackets help us identify the correct order of operations. So let's look at another example and think now, if I had this, how would I enter that into a computer? So 3 times x raised to the power 2, we've seen something like this before, plus, this is what's new here, right? This fraction, because now I want to have brackets to say that all of this in the numerator is divided by, and I want brackets around this denominator too to say that it's divided by everything in this denominator. So I've got 3 times x raised to the power 2 plus all of this is in brackets. So these outer brackets represent everything in the numerator. Sorry, keeps switching on me. We've got 2 times x here multiplied by the sign. What's the input to the sign? X squared plus 1, so I need that in brackets. That's divided by the denominator. So everything in the denominator needs to be in brackets. And we've got x raised to the power 2 plus 2 times x. So we need to tell the computer we're multiplying by using our asterisk plus 1. Okay, so that is a good start on how we enter our arithmetic operations into our online quizzes, what our special functions are, like the sine, the cosine, the tangent, the natural log, the exponential function, the square root function, and how we can use our brackets both to indicate the input into our functions and also our order of operations. You should now try to have a go at these 3 problems that are shown here and see how you would type that into the computer. Have a think about it, write it down, and once you have had a good go at that, then go to the notes, which are on stream and contain most of what I've just talked about here in part 1 video. Have a look at those notes, and the answers to these are there, so you can check your work against these answers. That's the end of part 1, or our first video for this week. And once you understand this and feel you've got a good idea of how to enter all these in, then you can move on to video number 2. Have a good week.